Welcome to the Foxhole. I'm your host, Max Facto. Well, welcome to the podcast. I'm here with former Marine and federal law enforcement officer. He was also a tactical operator and special investigator. He's a father of 3 boys, a husband, and also a former Marine. His name is Tom Malone. Tom, welcome to the Foxhole.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, so today I wanted to dive into a couple of topics with you. One, your service in Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, Gulf War illness, your experiences navigating the VA for care and services related to Gulf War illness, and then also a good friend of yours who you served with during Desert Storm, Scott Bianco. But before I get too far and too deep into those weeds, why don't you tell me what year was it that you entered the Marine Corps?
I joined in 1988, August of 98, and I graduated boot camp on actually the day before the Marine Corps birthday on November 9th.
Couldn't ask for a better time than that.
No, yeah, it was an interesting time to graduate.
What was going on in Hollywood in terms of movies in 1988 that you remember?
Man, I'm not really a big movie guy, so I don't remember. I was a baseball player in high school and stuff, so I didn't spend a lot of time behind the TV. So I just remember I listened to a lot of music.
What were you listening to?
Metallica and Judas Priest and stuff like that. So.
That was big. Metallica. That was like probably their coming of age year. That right around that time period in the late '80s, right? That's when people really started diving into Metallica. Was there something that drew you to the Marines?
So I was supposed to. I actually got a baseball scholarship to Garden City, Kansas, and I remember. So I went for a tryout or to just kind of hang out with their baseball team, and I remember I was playing shortstop and had a kid come up and he pointed his bat at me and he said, "Coming at you, rookie," and he hit a baseball so hard at me. And I fielded it and crow hopped and, went to throw it to first base, and he was already at first base. And I'd never experienced the game that fast. So I was really in a decision-making time, and I was going to have to work while I went to college. So I came back home and just really kind of pondered things. I'd always, kind of wanted to join the military. And I was a guy that was not going to take the easy way out. And so the Marine Corps was the most elite fighting force, and that's what I chose.
So for you, you didn't have familial connections or anything of that nature? It wasn't a movie that drew you there? It was just this wanting to do something that was hard or tough?
Right. Yeah, my dad was in the Air Force, and he was a crew chief on a I forget what kind of planes he was on, but he was in the latter part of Korea and on a little bit of Vietnam. So I always just highly respected that. I felt like to serve my country was a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love my country, and so that was what I decided to do. I figured if I got to get money after I got out of the Marine Corps, then that would be great. But my real goal when I went in is, I used to tell everybody that I wanted to go to war for my country, even though it was really peaceful at that time.
Yeah, there was Vietnam had really. There were some other skirmishes, but nothing big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was nothing going on. In fact, my best friend, the day that I left for boot camp, he used to play Iron Maiden. If you're gonna die with your boots on. So, and so he used to play that for me all the time.
I had that similar song echoing in my head on a regular and frequent basis. Where are you? Did you go to boot camp at Parris Island or at Camp Pendleton or MCRD?
I went to MCRD San Diego.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
realize that. And then you went to your MOS school was where?
My MOS school I was a supply guy, so I went to Barstow, California.
So you went from one choice location, MCRD, which actually is
Hmm.
part of it takes place at Camp Pendleton, and then you rolled out to the Garden City of Barstow.
Right.
Did you think you were going to
Yeah.
stay in San Diego, or did you know pretty early you were going out to Barstow?
I knew they told us, in boot camp that it was going to be Barstow, so I really didn't know. I mean, I knew that when I enlisted, I signed up to be a supply administrator, which I thought, but I ended up a supply warehouseman. Even though I only served in that MOS for 3 months, and then I was taken out of that MOS.
For bigger and better things, which we'll get to in a
For
second.
much bigger and better things. Yeah.
All right. So, and then you went from your MOS school to, tell me, another terrible location I'm sure you went to.
Yeah, it was horrible. I mean, so our group was a pretty large group. I think we had 24 in our supply group. And they said, I remember them announcing, where we were going. And they said, so 12 of you will go to Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. And they read off the names. And I just made the names. I think they went to the M's. And then they said, the rest would go, different spots.
29 stumps or something like that. Hey, I lost you for a second. So you said you just made the list to go to Hawaii.
Right. Yeah. So I think I just made the list to go, made the cutoff, so to speak, to go to Hawaii. And I remember, our class was really tight, but after that, we were not very tight because,
Right.
the ones that didn't get Hawaii, they were pretty upset.
Uh-huh.
So
I've had a similar experience where I ended up getting a duty station in Texas that was highly desired, and that was the only one that got noticed early, and there were a lot of upset people that I got that. And then it turns out like 7 of us went there, so everyone was just mad at the 7, which was great because
Right.
they weren't just mad at me, right? like I had some sort of choice in getting myself there. So you and I first met at the University of Georgetown Medical Center. And we were spending a week's vacation in there, getting tested for essentially Gulf War illness. Dr. James Baranick was the researcher. He's an MD, probably one of the most respected doctors on Gulf War illness. He's been researching that for 20 plus years, probably upwards of closer to 30. And during that experience, we did things like functional MRIs, brain scans, brain MRIs. Lumbar puncture, also known as the spinal tap, lots of cognitive tests, lots of blood work, sort of a modified VO2 max test, an exercise-induced stress test of sorts. And what I would like to do is kind of walk with you through how you ended up there. So you get out of your MOS school, you go to Hawaii, Desert Storm happens, and you go there as what?
So
in what capacity?
When I get to Hawaii, we join our warehouse, and again, all 11 or 12 of us went to this, to the warehouse where we're going, and I remember that there was just, I don't know. I mean, again, we were a pretty tight group, but they had the warrant officer that was running our unit called me and said that there was, for the base, there was a blind board. And so it basically was a board that nobody knew what the outcome was. So I was sent to a board that was 3-day board. It was a physical fitness test, knowledge test, and then they inspected our uniforms and stuff. And I was selected as the battalion commander's driver. And so I went to work for Colonel Olson, and started getting all kinds of training right away. So,
and that training was tactical training and some other sorts of things like that.
Yeah, they sent me to an executive protection type school, like a defensive tactics school in the Kahukus. And it was interesting. So a lot of these classes were quick makeup classes. So I was in some of them by myself. In the defensive tactics school, I was, assigned to a fighting hole that was the commander's fighting hole. And, they taught me like that. I went to tactical Humvee school. Where I learned to do crazy things with a Humvee.
Yeah.
And some other driving tactics courses. So.
And you went to the Gulf in that capacity.
Yes.
And so, when did you arrive?
So Colonel Olson and I probably August. It was. I think the invasion was August 3rd.
Yeah.
And I took him to an important meeting with the command general on August 5th. And I remember him coming out of that meeting, and he was, really somber. And he said, Malone, you need to pack your bags. We're going to Saudi Arabia. And so we built up really quick, built up a advanced party. That's when I found out that BSSG in Hawaii was basically the advanced brigade service support group, the advanced support group for any landing in any country. We were the ones that were going to go. So I arrived in Saudi Arabia on August 13th.
So right after he invades the 3rd, I think at sometime like the 5th or 8th, Saddam Hussein says he's gonna pull out of Kuwait because he's invaded Kuwait at that point. He doesn't, and then shortly thereafter, a big group of people started arriving. You were part of that party. For the Marines, it was arriving sort of advanced party, I guess.
Right. Yeah, we arrived. The 82nd Airborne overtook the port of Jabal, where we were going to be assigned, and then we relieved them, and they went towards the airport, and we took over the port at that point, getting ready for our MPS ships.
So as Marines were arriving in country, they started pushing forward along that Saudi Arabia Kuwaiti border, and so that, I imagine that meant the span of leadership for your boss was quite forward, and I'm guessing that entailed you escorting him on a regular basis to and from those locations.
It's amazing, which I think kind of hindered my VA claim because it sounds so far-fetched. But there was probably only five of us drivers in country at that point. But I literally covered the whole theater right away. So, Colonel Olson actually didn't go with us. I went with Colonel Beinhardt. So for some reason they pulled Colonel Olson just before the deployment. I still to this day don't know why, but we were assigned another colonel. So Colonel Beinhardt, which he's actually in the books. They wrote a book about logistics and how Desert Shield and Storm happened, and it has a good portion of the book about him and how he commanded during that. But we covered, it seemed like the whole country. We would, spend a day and we would go north and visit the observation posts. And then we would go south and go to Bahrain for meetings. We would go to Dhahran for some of the buildup and to, set logistics for troops traveling to the port of Jabal. And then we would go to the airport, which I can't remember the airport's name that was right there, but we were also setting up a field airport. So we would go back and forth to that. And that's really what we did. It was kind of like a dog. If something happened in Saudi Arabia, we were there the next day.
Mm-hmm. And leading up to, let me back up a second. I talked to another Marine a couple of weeks ago who was in Jubal and had mentioned that during the air campaign, a Scud missile flew over their area, and I think it detonated or was shot down. And she recalled some exposures from that event. Were you around during that time, and if you were, maybe tell me a little bit about it, and then any other exposures you remember as the air campaign started, and then later the breaching operation of 1st and 2nd Marine Division.
Yeah, and so there was a portion of that attack that, I had a top secret clearance, and so some of that, for a lot of time I wasn't sure whether I could even tell people that I did, but there was actually 2 Scuds that night, and one landed in the water. The Patriots were not able to take it down. It just fell short. But the other one that was shot down by a Patriot. And the next day, we went to the site where it was shot down at. And that kind of encouples what I said, that if something happened, we were always there.
Yeah.
And so the colonel always, if something happened, he wanted to be there to look. So we went to that site, and I remember, some of the chemical guys, we were all making fun of, Saddam Hussein and their troops. They said, I remember them inspecting it and saying, the guy can't even load his chemicals right in these Scuds. And, we're laughing, and they were saying, some of the stuff that they loaded this warhead with was expired, and just wasn't really going to be effective, so to speak. So, but
wow.
we later found out, so there's some books on it or whatever that I believe that warhead was loaded with sarin gas. It just it sputtered out or something, when it got to us. So. But that was kind of what we did.
So I want to mention cover a couple things. You said earlier you mentioned your clearance, and for anyone listening, the 2 incidents you're talking about are obviously not classified any longer. So there's no risk of anyone learning something
right.
that they shouldn't. Right? That's quite public information. But you said something that I wasn't aware of, that at least one of those Scuds was or had chemical weapons on board, or at least markings of chemical weapons. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. So the chemical guys that that were inspecting the Scud, I vividly remember them. Making jokes about how he loaded them. And saying the guy's not even loading the right chemicals. Or they were expired or whatever. So, it was kind of a joke that, we were all kind of laughing at. There was very few people there. There was a few command people, or whatever, and then just the chemical guys that were inspecting the warhead. So,
but in your mind, there was chemicals on that Scud, at least from what you were gathering from those around you.
When you listening to it as an 18-year-old kid, you don't, I wouldn't say that, at the time I said, oh, well, this thing's loaded with chemical warfare. I'm more latched on to, they were saying, oh, well, what a joke. The guy doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah. His capabilities were lacking.
Right.
I'm tracking.
Later in life, as I've studied and, talked about this, there's no doubt in my mind that there was.
Mm-hmm.
There was that night that we all scrambled for, cover. Our headquarters unit that was still on the port was very close to the Desert Rats headquarters. And so they published their intelligence a whole lot different than American troops did. So we would sound air raid sirens, and they had a nice, comfortable British voice come on to a loudspeaker and said, incoming scud, 10 minutes.
Stand by for goodness.
Yeah. And so, they were just, very matter of fact. And, I said, I can remember thinking, man, he is, um, he's, shooting at us. And so
Yeah.
there were some meetings after that too, and the colonel entrusted me quite a bit when he would come out of those meetings. But, one of their concerns is that, he had the Port of Jabal locked in. Those two scuds, one I think ran out of fuel. That's why it landed short. But the one that was shot down, they were on point.
Mm-hmm.
They were coming our direction.
He had that facility zeroed in.
Yeah.
I can tell you from personal experience, that was I happened to be one day in the rear getting a shower. We'd go back every 30 days or so for a shower and sugar, because there was someone making ice cream cones. And one of the days that we were there, one of these air raid alarms went off, right? And it was scary as hell, because there's nothing you can do. Just sit and wait, right? It's just incoming. And I remember going back out to the front with Ripper, that I was grateful that I wasn't back there, because I kind of felt like I had places to go, or I could hunker down better than I could if I was just in this big built up area and there were giant missiles coming in to a position. Mm-hmm. So for everyone who is back at the rear where these scuds were coming in, not only a threat of just massive explosions, because these are not small mortars, and not that mortars are minute in any way, they do a lot of damage, but these were big missiles, and there was always a constant threat of them being filled with chemical weapons. So that's a pretty scary proposition anytime an air raid alarm went off, which is it's like a Pavlov's response after a little while. I'm sure those things go off, right, and everyone's just scrambling.
Yeah. And another thing that was concerning too, that you didn't think about until we figured out that he had us dialed in, but we offloaded all 8 MPS ships. So, and as the units were coming, they would pick up their supplies and go forward. But our port had so much artillery shells on it that it was literally I have a couple pictures where it's a sea of artillery shells, back to back. And, if it would have struck the artillery area that we had staged, it would have been, unbelievable.
Serious fireworks.
Destruction.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And do you remember any other exposures? That sounds like significant. You're around things that likely had nerve gas or chem bioweapons on them, and then you're going back and forth out to the front. So after the ground invasion, the breaching operations start, and there's all this, I think now it's not even a mystery, right? That there was chem bioweapons, low level exposures, probably some higher level exposures in different area during those breaching operations, and plumes of crap that were blowing over, mixed in with the toxic oil well fires. All of that, do you remember anything significant about going in and out of those spaces? Any symptoms you had or anything of that nature as the breaching operation started?
I had another incident during the breaching operation, which another interesting thing about my job is if the colonel wasn't using me, then the XO or the sergeant major was going to use me. I was like an abused guy.
Yeah, you were the hey
but
you.
I enjoyed. Yeah. So during some of those breaching operations, I remember going with the sergeant major Reynaldo Rivera, and we never figured out whether it was friendly fire or whether somebody hit an IED or something like that. But we had an explosion really close to our Humvee. And the first thing that we noticed about this explosion is the smell immediately. And it was immediate. It was like, like powder, like, gun powder and stuff like that. Smell right away. There was no time to get our gas masks. And so the sergeant major and I looked at each other, and it was like we were just, waiting for something to happen. I looked at him, and he was kind of watching me to see if, it was going to affect us or whatever. And then the oddest thing, that I think has ever happened to me is a bird that came out of nowhere just landed on the front of my Humvee. Like it was, shocked or something like that, but it landed on the front of the Humvee, and it's sitting there trying to get its wits about itself. And Sergeant Major Rivera had been to Vietnam. He'd been all over the place. And so he immediately starts laughing hysterically, and he's hitting me. He goes, "We're all right. We're all right." He goes, "If that bird's alive, that wasn't chemicals." So it was kind of a unique experience.
Knowing that if the bird had keeled over, there was some exposure there. It could have been some other exposure.
Right.
When was it that you first started noticing symptoms that are now indicative of what's called Gulf War illness? Like
I'd say
GI type problems, headaches, those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty quickly. I don't remember the date specifically, but it was in theater. I started to bleed in my stool, so, and started having problems with bowel issues like right away, and so it was significant enough to where I went to see the doctor that was assigned to the port, and he prescribed me some pills. I don't remember what they were, but he said it's probably internal hemorrhoids or something like that. I was sitting a lot because of driving the vehicle and stuff like that, so he thought that it was possibly that.
You're not the only person that I've talked to that has had those very similar experiences. That, and some people, it's they've told me that it's so great that they've had to have blood transfusions or infusions of units of blood put back into them because they've lost so much. And then migraine headaches, things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, I would get migraines, which at the time I would, I thought that maybe, we were just, working. I had the incident with Scott, and there was just a lot of stress. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's when started getting some migraines. So I became a pretty frequent flyer with the corpsman.
Yeah.
So, or Motrin. So.
Yeah, the ever popular medication. If you've got an amputation, take a Motrin.
Whatever. I mean,
you need a vasectomy, take a Motrin.
Right. Yeah, and you had to see the corpsman to get the 800 milligrams or whatever, the bigger pills.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
those are like candy too. A lot, like I know I gave those out quite a bit. 800 milligrams of Motrin. Now it's like you would think, oh, you definitely can't have this, but that stuff is just flowing out, right? 800 milligrams. People taking it like it's a Tic Tacs or something. With respect to the migraines, what I've heard from other veterans too is that though the classic sort of clouding of vision with migraines, they all have that, but a lot of them have echoed to me that one of the things that sets off their migraines is sensitivities to it's like smell sensitivities, like chemical sensitivities. And it can be from burning candles or newspaper or just gasoline, petroleum, fragrances, the smells, those sorts of things will trigger migraine. Do you have those kinds of symptoms as well?
I am super sensitive to chemicals. I mean, in a way, I consider myself fortunate that I got it because, when we came back, a lot of Marines turned to drinking a lot. But for some reason, I could not tolerate alcohol. I mean, it literally tasted like, I was drinking a cup of rubbing alcohol or something. I could, taste it. And smells of paint, stuff like that would trigger migraines for me, trigger kind of a fog.
You were able to drink beer or alcohol before going, but then later unable to.
Yeah, not a proud thing that was in my my Marine Corps jacket, but after we graduated, we kind of celebrated at a local NCO club or something like that,
Yeah.
and my friend and I had a little bit too much, and so I got, what do they call it,
Like an
a
NJP or
little
something?
entry in my yeah, a little entry in my jacket. So for underage drinking is what they called it.
Well, if you're on base, I think you could back then you could go into like an exchange and buy beer if you were 18.
Right,
You couldn't get the hard alcohol, but you could get all the beer you wanted. I think
right.
I have a similar experience with wine. If I like take a sip of wine, seem to get a migraine almost immediately. But I've heard that same thing from other Gulf War veterans too, that they experience those kinds of chemical triggers. Any other major things that I know there are symptoms of like major immune endocrine system problems. Have you experienced any of those?
I have. So, I mean, some of the stuff that I started to experience right away, I mean, is so my bleeding. I used to bleed a lot in the shower, and that's not something that you want to come out of the shower and tell your wife or tell hey, Colonel, guess what? I'm bleeding a lot,
Yeah.
and um, I was in a unique position when we came back. So, I did not want to be labeled as as going to see the corpsman all the time. And so, but I would bleed a lot. And then after I got out, I was having, fatigue issues quite a bit. In 1996 or seven, I started chasing my fatigue issues. Um, and I started to, my whole endocrine started kind of breaking down around the same time that I couldn't tolerate my bowel issues also. And so I think in 97 or 98, I seen an endocrinologist who found out that my thyroid was, sputtering and acting up. And so she prescribed me some medicine, and then that didn't stop my fatigue. So they started chasing other things. I had an incident at home with my wife and my son, and my blood sugar completely crashed. And so my wife went to a local fire station because she'd worried that I'd gotten myself a hold of some alcohol or something early in the morning, which was, you know, was impossible. She just, didn't understand what was going on, why I was literally, acting whacked out. And so the fire people told her, man, that's a sugar issue. And so they came and they took my sugar, and when they took me to the hospital, they said it was 32. So then I started, this is all the same time that my bowel is crashing, my thyroid is crashing. So then my endocrinologist started trying to chase the low sugar issue. So I got endoscopies looking at my pancreas. They said, there's no way that your sugar should be this low. You're secreting too much insulin.
Mm-hmm.
And they sent me to the University of Virginia, Commonwealth. They kept me there for 3 days. They wanted to crash my sugar in 3 days. Well, they crashed it in about 3 hours.
Hmm.
And I started having reactions. So they did another endoscopy and tried to look for what they thought. They said that you have to have a tumor on your pancreas. And so they looked for it, couldn't find it. And so they offered me exploratory surgery to try to feel for the tumor, take my pancreas out and feel for it. But at the same time, I was also scheduled to have surgery on my bowel. So we, elected to not do the pancreas thing. They said, you could just alter your diet and we'll track it. And, I remember saying it sounds like a morbid thing, but might be good just let it grow a little bit so we can see it, and then we can take it out.
Mm.
And so, but then right in that same time frame, I had surgery on my bowel, and the bleeding was caused from I had IBS C,
Yeah.
and it caused me to tear the inner walls of my lower bowel, and so there was so much scar tissue and stuff like that there. So, which they didn't realize until they got in there, so to speak. And I lost 7.5 pounds on the operating table. So
Of just
backed up feces.
yeah, yeah. So you're describing like this almost a full body system problem, right? That you start noticing these symptoms early on. You're still in country, and they continue to escalate to the point where you're having these kinds of surgeries, diagnosis of potential tumors and on critical organs. What have you been doing? I mean, I think what I want to get from you is because that spans a long time period. I mean, we're just talking about it in a few minutes, but that's a long time to be dealing with and trying to get at the crux of what's causing all these problems for you. And I know we met at Georgetown. What other studies have you participated in for this very reason, just to try to get at a better diagnosis or get at a treatment? I know you've been to a few, but which ones have you been to?
So, well, the study, I went to Katie Holton's American University study. I went to Dr. Nancy Klimas's study at the at the Miami VA.
Yeah.
Which was really beneficial to me. So, I mean, because it got her attention to me, and Nancy Klimas is one of the leading Gulf War analysts.
For sure,
yeah.
She is. And real quick, I think it's important to kind of point a few things out here. One, Nancy Klimas is in the state where you're from. She's from Florida. But the Georgetown study, you traveled from Florida to the D.C. area for treatment or exploratory diagnosis, if you will. And then Katie Holton's study is also in the D.C. area. So here you are, and that's a 2-week study. The Beranek study is like a 1-week study. So you're taking significant time off of work, and to get yourself to play. The point I want to make here is this is so important to you that you're upping your life for periods of time just to try to get at what is causing this, and then what is it I can do to help make my life better. I mean, those are pretty significant life changes or events that you're just trying to attack this problem.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the fatigue problem was I would chase that fatigue problem, and the doctors, not understanding what the whole reason would just, some of them would throw up their hands and say, "Oh, well, you're depressed,"
Yeah.
And so, I went through a multiple, I probably tried every depression medicine there is, and, I'll be on it for a few weeks or a month or whatever, and it'll work for a little while. And then I'm right back to the fatigue issue, and they don't understand it.
Yeah.
So I just got tired of chasing that. And I was really fortunate to find these studies to help me understand it.
Yeah, because those doctors are specifically researching Gulf War illness, and they have a better grasp and understanding of it. What was it at Berenek's lab and study that you feel comfortable talking about, that you were diagnosed with there, that kind of started to give you some answers?
I got a whole laundry list of things, but the fatigue, and I had a significant day for me was when I did the exercise test.
Mm-hmm.
And the first day, I physically couldn't make it to the finish, which, Beranek was a little surprised, because he said, my heart was performing perfectly. Everything was performing perfectly. But, I lost cognitive function. I got a major migraine, and I was so bad fatigued, I couldn't finish it.
Yeah, I think one of the things he's discovered, right, is there's this disconnect between the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems, and a lot of it's induced by exercise. So, guys, in your situation, you get on a bicycle, go through this exercise test, your heart rate's able to recover, but your central nervous system stays activated, and that's probably, I think this is some of what he's summarizing, right? Probably driving some of the fatigue problems.
Right. So the second day I made it through the test, and I'll never forget. Baranuk was over there at his little machine, as I'm sure that he was with you. He's calling out numbers to the other nurse, and he started, kind of acting like a mad scientist, like something had totally caught his attention, and he just was so surprised. He said, your heart and your lungs are performing, like an Olympic heartbeat. Once it leveled off, and it said, it was performing, great. But again, I had such a bad migraine that, I went back to the room, and I think that was the only night that I slept that I didn't hear him dropping clipboards for you.
Yeah. So for the listeners, one of the things that they do in this study is they're checking your sensitivity to sound and noise too. So like, it seems like every hour or maybe every 30 minutes they come in, and one of the things they had is this metal clipboard, and they would drop it on the floor, and it just, after like an hour or a couple hours of hearing this, it's just grating on your nerves, right? And so Tom was in the room adjacent to me, so I would hear when they were dropping clipboards in his room, and he would hear in mine, and they're flipping on really bright lights at the same time. So it was quite the experience. I simultaneously had a migraine at the same time you did, because we were both on that bike at the same time. So we had very similar reactions to that. And I remember, like, as those tests were being done, they completed their day. They basically turned off all the lights, and it just went quiet. They were just like, "Hey, we just give these guys a break and let them ride out these migraines," because it was a pretty intense day. Because that day starts with a lumbar puncture too, a spinal tap. So it was pretty intense.
Right. And I don't know if he did it for you too, but they actually went and got me some, I think, sumatriptan or something.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get a migraine medication. Yeah. He
yeah.
He was like, "Hey, I'm not going to make you guys suffer. Go ahead and take this for your migraine." Yeah, so I know he'd given us both that. And then Katie Holton's study is another interesting study at American University you mentioned. She hypothesized that there's a break between the brain, the blood-brain barrier, and that things we consume, like excitotoxins, can pass through that barrier and impact our brains. And I guess some of the thought process is that may be what's contributing to some of this our brain inflammation issues. And so for her study, it was primarily a nutrition study where we removed glutamate from our diet, and glutamate comes in many forms and flavors and different names. But how did you respond to that study in terms of removing that from your diet? How did that impact you?
So it did help me quite a bit. It mainly made an impact on my bowel. So it helped that a lot. But it did expose that my cognitive function was poor. Which I don't know why it did that, but I did really poorly at short-term, memory, cognitive stuff. And so
so she does a whole bunch of cognitive tests during the 2-week study, right? And so you got from her that you have cognitive decline or lower cognitive function than the average Joe.
Yeah, I declined on the diet. So they said that it's possible that it was related to my thyroid, but I told her, I said, it's something, my cognitive function is something I've dealt with since my return, so much so that, I've learned in my life to set myself breadcrumbs, at work, I'll set breadcrumbs. So just in case,
so sort of memory triggers.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that'll help me remember stuff. and I'd done that since my return, just a way to, I've always been so afraid to, I was very proud of my job and very proud of being a Marine. And so, in a way to seek treatment or something like that was kind of a sign of weakness, of giving up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I did feel that quite a bit when I started doing this. But
for sure,
it was just,
you're not alone in that. I think everyone feels that way, that it's, it's like going to sick call or something. Yeah, I'm not going to go in there because it's just a little bit of blood or a little bit of this or that. And so people don't get seen, soldiers and Marines don't get seen for the things they need to be seen for. Could you summarize, if you will, we talked about all these system problems that you've had, and it's not uncommon for a Gulf War veteran. But could you summarize for us when like your first time interfacing with the Veterans Administration for care and services, and then how long and difficult of a challenge was that for you, and then if you have any pointers for any other veterans who are just now dipping their foot into that water.
So I filed in 2014, and I remember that I'd seen something on the VA website about, getting health care for Gulf War veterans. So that's what I thought was what the claim would cover. I didn't realize that there was other things attached to it. But so when I filed, I really thought the VA was there to take care of me. I really thought that, you just, you put out a little bit of information there, and you put the things that you struggle with. And, I put PTSD, even, it was, tough for me to put that because of, Scott, and whether I'd ever be forced to talk about it. I mentioned a few things in there, but, I really just thought that they were going to be there to help me. And so, basically described to them some of the stuff that I've described to you. I had a unique job. I covered the entire theater. I got a Navy Commendation Medal, and I think that they said that I covered almost 18,000 miles, driving sergeant majors and colonels around the desert. So
what was the result of that initial 2014 claim?
I was denied pretty quickly. They sent me to a CMP evaluation in Gainesville, and it was denied pretty quickly. So that's when I sought the help of a VSO, and that's when I really started getting involved in the studies, to try to build up my documentation. It was unique to me that seeing that denial and, just basically casting my service aside,
Yeah. And when you said build up your documentation, I've heard this from other veterans too. I think what you really get it, what you're talking about there is, you go to the CMP exam, you say, here's my symptoms, but you're not coming in there with an official chronic fatigue diagnosis or fibromyalgia diagnosis or whatever. And there's no one in that CMP process that's looking at you going, well, you definitely have that. Let's put that on your record and get you care and treatment for that. They just look at it and go, hey, you don't have any of this stuff documented anywhere, so see you next time. So the studies help get at that. And if you go, and I think the other thing that's important here is you walk into a normal private doctor and say, hey, doc, here's my symptoms. And you just start describing to them what we've been talking about here, and they almost glass over in 5 seconds, right? Like, what? Yeah, what is this guy talking about? Nerve gas, Gulf War illness. It's not on the formulary. It's not on their treatment records. They don't know, what it is or how to treat it. So getting to these studies to interface with doctors who've been researching Gulf War illness for 30 years, 25 years is critical in, one, helping you put a name and helping veterans put a name to what it is they have. And then two, in then taking that to the VA and saying, hey, I have this thing called Gulf War illness. I have chronic fatigue. I have fibromyalgia, diagnosed by this MD. It's important for your process.
I did have one diagnosis, and that was, that was the most difficult one for me to come. In 2010, I was diagnosed with PTSD by a private psychologist. I'd actually taken my, son to the doctor, to a psychologist he was having trouble with dyslexia or something like that. And much to my surprise, the psychologist said, "Okay, well, we'll do some stuff with him, but the first thing we want to do is with the parents." And so, a lot of questionnaires, a lot of computer work, and just and then an interview, and he was, tapped a few veins and asked about my combat service, and he said that the signs that he noticed were pretty severe PTSD.
Yeah.
But the VA cast that aside and said he's not a psychiatrist, and so he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
So 2014, you submit this claim for all this stuff. You get a denial within probably a year of that. And then...
Yeah, I actually got it pretty quick. I filed in March of 2014. They sent me for my CMP in July. And then in August, it was denied.
Yeah, so then you go into this appeal process, and you have to wait how long to kind of get through the process again?
Man, the appeal process was slow and really painful. So, I think probably 3 years that I was in the appeal process. And, Dr. Baranuk talked me into, he said, which I think he said to you too, he said, he goes, "Listen, you're a poster child for Gulf War illnesses." You know what I mean? Gave me my laundry list of diagnoses. And he said, "If I were you, tomorrow morning, I'd put on your suit and go sit in front of your congressman." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And show him these results, and, you know what I mean? And try to get his help. And so I did that. And Dr. Neil Dunn, which is my congressman, kind of jumped in and started trying to help me, which either helped or hurted me. But, and then Senator, and here goes my memory issues, but then I had Bill Nelson, Senator Nelson. He encouraged me to join the ramp. And so I joined the ramp, which then put me at the bottom of the list again. And joining the ramp ended up being the worst decision that I'd made.
Talk about what that process is.
So the ramp, they're supposed to, you sign a form that you're willing to withdraw your appeal and put it in the ramp program that was initiated.
This is through the VA.
And that you're through the VA,
yeah.
And it said that, your appeal will be looked at quicker. Well, it wasn't getting looked at quicker. So that's when I enlisted the help of an attorney. Mm-hmm. So that specialized in these areas.
So this is crazy, right? It's a process to get at care and treatment is so complex and so hard to manage and to do yourself that it takes multiple years to get there. And it gets to a point where you eventually have to pay for an attorney to help navigate a system. And that, I think for a lot of veterans, that's something that's almost beyond reach. It's hard to do. Attorneys aren't cheap. There can be upwards $250, $300 an hour on some of the things
mm-hmm.
you're working on. So these are, to me, it's heartbreaking to hear that guys have to go to attorneys to do that, because it should be a system. It seems to me like it should be a system that's easy enough to navigate. You can submit some paperwork, and there's someone on the government side that can help get you through the process, that's there looking out for you. So they're erring on the side of the veteran versus erring on the side of discrediting the veteran. I think that, for me, that's been the biggest challenge of talking to veterans and their challenge navigating the system. So thanks for summarizing that. I think that's important to to communicate that it's not an easy process. And ironically enough, the duration of yours, as long as that is kind of short in comparison to some other ones that go on for 10 years or longer. So I'm wondering if we can now just kind of step back in time a little bit. And I know you wanted to talk about a good buddy of yours that you served with in the Gulf, Scott Bianca. I'd like to sort of just open that up to you and maybe give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about who he was, how you guys knew each other, and the circumstances around your relationship and what went on in Desert Storm.
So, as BSSG, we folded into First Force Service Support Group and then became First Combat Service Support Group when we married up with the Marines out of California. I became kind of, again, like I said, tossed around. My colonel went to headquarters. He wasn't needing me as much, but his XO and the sergeant major were. So I remember, I met Scott. We were in a headquarters tent where the driver and, certain, people were in this tent on the Port-au-Jabal. And he was a heavy equipment operator, the only one that was in that unit. He was, assigned duties, special duties or something for our unit. He was a corporal. And at the time, the majority of us in there were Lance Corporals, so we all kind of looked up to him. Mm-hmm. I remember we used to get, care packages, and he, like any Marine, any senior Marine would, he decided to enlist a contest between Lance Corporals of, everybody would send gum. I don't remember if you remember that, but people sent a lot of gum. And so we got some care packages that literally had cases of gum. And so he enlisted a contest one night, which Marine could chew the most sticks of gum. So, and don't ask me, it was just, it was crazy. So, but anyways, just a kind of a guy that I kind of looked up to. We would, off and on, he slept next to me. So off and on, we would talk about our wives, and he'd just married or just been married a very short time to a girl back in California, and he had pictures. And so, just a real down to earth guy, but, he loved to do what he was doing. And, he worked a lot. And the reason why we would meet each other is because he would work late and I would work late. So, everybody else was racked out, and we'd have a chance to chat a little bit. The night that Scott passed is actually just after the war had started, and it was on February 17th. I remember I was at a meeting with the XO Major Lavigny, where the commander of Landing Support Battalion. And, we came back from the meeting, and I just got back to my tent, and there was an urgent call for us to get down to the port for an accident. And so, I got the Humvee really quickly, got Major Lavigny. We raced down to the port, and, there were some ship guys running around when we got there that were talking to Major Lavigny, and we're trying to explain to him something, something about an accident. And then they turned on the lights to the back of a ship that was being unloaded, and they were pointing to a forklift, and then pointed in the water, and there was bubbles in the water. And it's when we realized that one of our forklifts was in the water. And so, we're trying to communicate, and at some point we realized that, our forklift operator hadn't come up. At this point, I don't have any idea what it is, but it's not like you can call 911
sure
when you're in that situation. So I had a radio system in my Humvee, and we were, calling Central Command and letting them know. And I remember, at one point I took off my boots. I was ready to get in the water. I was a PADI certified diver that I just came. Um, the the ship guys were trying to find some scuba gear, or at least a face mask or something. And I remember I'm about to try and go in. I'm feeling like we have to do something.
And you're thinking you're going to go over the side into the water?
Yeah, I was going to go, off the port. There was, it didn't at the time didn't seem like a really long way from the port, the wall to the water. It was really, really calm, eerily calm. The water was completely flat, and the lights that had turned on the back of this ship, lit up the water. You couldn't quite see to the bottom, but one of the the ship guy seen me getting ready to do this, and he started yelling out meters or whatever, and how many meters deep or whatever it was, and it turned out that it was about 70 feet deep. And so Major Lavigny wouldn't let me get in. So we waited for our calls that went out, and it seemed like it was forever, but it was rather quickly. A nurse and two, I think they were SEALs, but two Navy divers showed up, and they went down right away, and they brought up a Marine, and I immediately recognized him as being my the guy that slept next to me. And so it was kind of both emotions right then. I'm initially a little sad, but I kind of at that point the war became real to me.
Mm-hmm.
Before it wasn't like it was real. You kind of feel invincible at that age, but at that point it became real.
Yeah.
There was a lot of realness that was to it. The next day I did his memorial for the unit, and I became a lot more upset. So did other people in the unit, and I kind of developed this revenge style attitude that we would get for Scott through this whole situation. They offered me the ability to escort his body back, and then they realized that he was from California. He came from First Force Service Support Group, and I came from BSSG. So they said no, that I couldn't go back, that it was too close to ground operations, and that we'd just have to let him go. And so I'm not even sure who went with him at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So
one of the things that you mentioned to me in our discussion before on this topic was with regard to Scott, was that you for many years since the incident didn't really discuss it, didn't really talk to anyone about it, and it wasn't until recently that you really decided you were going to kind of put your foot in that water, if you will, and since then have been in touch with other people that were in his life at that time, and it's kind of come around for you in terms of being helpful to discuss it and talk about it.
Right. So for a long time, I never told my wife. I never told my second wife. It was always something, again, that I felt a little, funny about. But, to this day, talking about the whole event is, makes me emotional. It affected me.
Sure.
And so I never told anybody. I didn't want to tell them about the rage that it it made me have towards other people. So I held on to it. I was first able to discuss it with my psychologist at the VA, and it opened up some things. I reconnected with the colonel that I worked for when I came back from Desert Storm, and I told him, because he was an engineer, and of course Colonel France, he's one of the strongest guys I've ever met in my whole life. His reaction to it was, okay, well, you got to face this. You're going to face it.
Yeah.
And, and so, he was willing to stand there with me to face it. And he said, okay, so have you tried to contact his family? And I said, I've looked them up every year, but I've never been able to make contact. And he said, okay, well, that's start, but we'll do something. And 2 days later, Colonel France had contacted Scott's mother and father. It was a shock to me, but I was able to email them, and I've talked to them a few times, just little things. I haven't really been able to verbally talk to them. Trying to prepare myself for it. I put out that Facebook message, just to keep him in people's thoughts, and it was a really cool thing that the nurse that was at the port that night, or at the hospital where they took him, said that it also affected her, because he was the first casualty that we'd had. And so she said that she would Google his name and Facebook his name all the time. And when she seen that that story, it immediately became apparent to her that I was one of those two individuals that she met, and that she'd always held him really close to her heart, because he was the first. So it just kind of opened up a whole lot of things. I'm supposed to Colonel France purchased a brick with Scott's name on it, and it's supposed to be placed at the Marine Corps Memorial for Engineers in Fredericksburg, Virginia.
Awesome. When's that?
I was supposed to speak there in September. They're going to do that.
All right.
So, and his parents are going to be a special guest, so I'll get to meet them for the first time.
Yeah, let me know when that happens. I'd like to be there.
Okay, I will.
So I think what I heard you say before was face things, right? Like sometimes you just got to look at it in the context of, well, first off, relationships you have in wartime scenarios or even deployments are not like the relationships you have in normal life, right? Because it's everything's intensified or multiplied 10, 15 times over. You have this, regular meetups with Scott. You have these regular exchanges with him, and that connection. It's really even hard to put into words, right? How close it really is a brotherly or brotherhood type of relationship, and then to lose somebody abruptly, and really not have any way to kind of close that out or follow up on it, because as soon as his death happens, the ground war starts, and then everything's just history at that point. There's really no way to go back to that. And so you said, face these things, and I think it's a testament to who you are, and that you've kind of put your foot back in this water again and said, hey, I really want to connect with this family. And I think the beauty in that is connecting with this nurse. She sounded like she was in a similar situation, right? And now you guys have kind of formed this bond, and now you found out about this brick, and that I think that's all. I think there are lessons in this experience for you, for all veterans who've suffered some sort of loss somewhere along the way, that it's helpful to reach back out, and as painful as it can be, it's also helpful to look at it in the context of the situation, right? And it's easy, I think, at times to put ourselves in the context of today and forget the context of when it actually happened. And that wasn't a normal friendship, right? It was a super normal friendship, because
Yeah, I
because of
mean,
the environment.
yeah, we didn't know each other for very long, but I mean, we definitely knew that, we, everybody in that tent, I mean, we were there for each other. We were everything to each other. In fact, I mean, not everybody got to go north for the ground war, so um, but they were just as affected by me, by his death as me, and so I remember, which led into the other problems that I have. But I would use my rage to, I used to take field jackets off of dead Iraqis and helmets, and I would stuff them in my Humvee to take them back to the Marines in the tent to show, I mean, that we were getting our, and I hate to use the word revenge, but I mean um, that his death wasn't in vain.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, it's combat and it's war, and those are the kinds of things that happen. There is, as hard as it is for folks who've not been there to they're looking at it from it's hard to look at it from a context of not being in combat when you are in combat. Those are the things that you just experienced. I've talked to a whole bunch of, I mean, every veteran I've talked to who's ever been in combat said the same thing. It's hard to look back and rationalize what you were doing and things that were going on in today's context. Look at into that context. I really appreciate you sharing that particular story, and I think it's probably maybe an opportunity for a future podcast too, when that brick gets placed, and maybe cover that event a little bit more, and maybe get the nurse on and his parents on too to talk about that. If I'm not mistaken, I think he was one of the very first casualties of the conflict,
Yeah,
right?
he was the first. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be awesome to cover. If you keep me apprised of that, I'd love to keep covering that with you about Scott. As we get ready to close out here, I wonder if you would share two things with us. One, what do you think caused or is the cause of, if you can, of Gulf War illness, whether it just be bioweapons or immunizations or a combination of those things? I'm curious to get your feelings and thoughts on that. Well, actually, there's three things. Two, what do you want Gulf War veterans to know that you didn't know, that you some knowledge you want to impart on them? And then the last thing is, what was your favorite MRE?
So I'll try to go in that order. So the thing that I would like to veterans to know is that there truly is two sides of the VA, and nobody realizes that going in. The care side, I've been very fortunate here in Mariana, and I have a really good psychologist, and one that has battled for me.
Mm-hmm.
I've met pretty good people. Nancy Climas is in the front lines fighting for us every day.
Yeah.
So, but then there's this, and I call it evil. I mean, the evil side of the VA, which is the benefit side. And I mean, I guess I could, in a way, kind of understand the way that they are. Our era of service members, we still had paper or medical files that weren't digital.
Yeah.
The new wave, they have digital. We had paper, so a lot of the stuff that we claim is hard to prove, and
there's no paper record,
right? And the one of the hardest parts to take for me was when I actually hired the attorney. We were able to discover a few more things after denials, and after my first claim, because of me describing that I'd been everywhere for most events. I even went to Riyadh after that bombing. The colonel, they wanted to go look. They wanted to go and see what logistics they would need down there. So I was there shortly after that event. But so when you describe something like that, they become very skeptical.
Yeah.
And so, There was one psychologist that offered an opinion that I was not being truthful. And once he attached that record to me, it affected my whole claim, because it created doubt, and it was a tough thing to overcome, which there's a good part of it too, because it really made me have to open up more about the things that, troubled me. It made me contact Colonel France and people that, that know, what I did was, unique, and,
Yeah.
So, that was, my perspective and my belief about the things, with the exposure with pills and stuff like that. There's no doubt in my mind that, the night that we smelt chemicals from that scud, there's no doubt in my mind, that we were exposed to something. We laugh and say, might have been exposed, expired or whatever. But, even low levels of that stuff, can affect people. The death rate, or the rate of survival with people that were on the port at that time is less than most other units that were in theater.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a reason for that. I took every single pill that you could take, the PB pills, anthrax, the horse pill that was unlabeled. And, my view of the government for that was, I went there with I was willing to give my life for my country. I don't think that they were intending to harm us when they were giving us those things. I think that they just really thought that it was going to be a nasty chemical war, and
No doubt.
they wanted to ease our pain some way.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And it was worth the risk to maybe hurt us, in the long run. You know what I mean? But allow us to survive, and the possibility that, we did get hit with chemicals. I wish that the government would just say, okay, so this guy was there. We know he took that stuff. Let's not put him through all of this pain and agony, and take care of him. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I'm fortunate that, I've finally been, service connected, and they treat me totally different now,
Yeah.
So it's, I just wish that there was that connect. And it seems like there's that connect now with the Marines that have digital files and stuff like that.
A little bit easier, I think, to document issues.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
Yeah. We just did a poor job, and maybe not even just poor job, but we just didn't have the things at the time.
Yeah. And I think that gets lost at the VA at times too. Anything that happens during a combat operation, you're not carrying your medical record in your pocket, right? So no one's making a note of something there and then it making it into your file. So I think there's that part gets missed during these compensation and pension exams, right? Like, well, there's nothing in your record. Well, yeah, it was during a combat operation. I didn't, and that was sustained for 100 hours or 10 days or 3 weeks or whatever. Never made it in my record. All right, I'm going to hold you to my last question, which is MRE.
My favorite MRE, and man, I would do anything to get them, was Chicken a la King, man.
With Tabasco?
That was golden. Yep, with Tabasco. I'd throw it up on the hood of my Humvee and get that thing nice and hot in the sun. And man, that was my go-to.
Yeah, that was one of my favorites.
It was the go-to for the desert rats too. So they would trade anything for Chicken a la King, man.
Yeah. Did you get some of their sea rats? We traded with them frequently for sea rats. Their own sea rats.
I did get sea rats. And in fact, I met a driver for a desert rat colonel that we kind of, hung out. I was able to trade MREs for one of their sub-freezing sleeping bags that I still have today.
Oh, nice.
It's like a mummy bag.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, it was
So what's the hands down the shittiest, worst tasting MRE that you had?
meatballs.
Oh, the
That
meatballs.
meatball thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and that fruit cake or whatever.
Yeah.
That just,
Yeah, that's terrible. That
yeah, I
that
can. Whenever I go to Subway and see a meatball sandwich, I think of that poor MRE.
yeah.
That,
So
what I
you're
mean?
not ever getting any meatball sandwiches from Subway.
Never. I've never had them since. Never had them since.
All right, Tom. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think people should know that you want to add?
Just don't stop. You know what I mean? Don't give up. I mean, I think, I mean, I leaned on you quite a bit. You know, Dr. Baranick said that you and I were twins. I mean, most of our results were
Yeah,
coming out the same.
I think we had very similar test results for sure.
But, don't give up. And, if you start that process, don't assume that they're there to help you. And, I mean, you got to go with everything locked and loaded and ready to fight from the start.
Yeah, Roger that. All right, Tom. With that, I'm gonna close us out of the foxhole. Appreciate you joining me. I'm sorry the lights went out on my face. Maybe I might have to do the rest of these in the dark, kind of like just a silhouette. And
right.
Until next time, we'll see you. Semper Fi, Devil Dog.
I appreciate it. Semper Fi.